Midstream Commission has substantively considered the people was in 2014, when it held meetings and voted to proceed with the project. It couldn't specify a particular configuration of the project or really anything else about it at that time, because all of the proposals, all of the configurations that had been studied had failed. So a 2-sentence letter was written to the Secretary of Interior, and things continued. The New Mexico Unit Agreement, which was the next formal step in the process, signed between the Capital Institute and the Bureau of Reclamation in 2015, also could not define a configuration. The appendix to that agreement that's supposed to describe the project is basically a meaningless description. I'm not going to go into all the details, but configuration after configuration has failed to pass muster. And now the proposed action for the environmental impact statement is so new and so poorly defined that there isn't even a preliminary engineering report that describes it or quantifies what it's all about. Recently, you signed amendment number 3 for AECOM, your engineering consultant. There's a recital, I believe it's the second recital in that in the amendment. It is absolutely false. You say that AECOM was selected to explore alternatives. And in fact, the RFP makes it very clear that they were selected to perform 30% design on an alternative that you assumed, and your project manager assumed, would have been fleshed out by the time that AECOM started. Instead, they spent, what's it, $1.5 million? Continuing to try to find something that makes sense. And you're going to spend more money on that today. So really the issue is, you've not deliberated the project, you don't know the merits. It is so different than what you thought you were approving back in 2014, yet you've taken no cognizance of that. I don't think you're doing your job. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on, Secretary report. Secretary Blaine.
Mr. Chairman, can we change the order and
Sure.
staff report first?
Sure, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm probably going to turn to some of the staff on occasion for some interesting stuff that has occurred since our last meeting. We'll start with the Legal Bureau report. And Chris, are you prepared to just kind of give an overview of the Wild Earth Guardians versus the Corps of Engineers and Middle Rio Grande Conservancy case? We had, I think, pretty significant decision that came down since the last meeting.
Sure, I can briefly just give an update of that case. It's been ongoing for quite a number of years now. And about the last week, the case essentially finally concluded. Because the United States government is one of the parties to the case, there's a 60-day period to appeal. So we don't know finally what the outcome is going to be, whether the case has ended or it's going to be appealed. But the ruling last week, and I talked to the Corps attorney yesterday, the U.S. Army Corps attorney, doesn't think that the case will be appealed, but the judge in a long memorandum order essentially found in favor of the Army Corps on almost every claim, dismissing all but 2 minor claims about the Corps' scope of discretion that limited that discretion to 2 minor instances of maintenance activities. One being cleaning out the Stilling Basin of Jemez Dam, and then the other being shutting off the water in the tunnel of Abiquiu Dam to check the tunnel that the water flows through. So those are the only two activities that the judge didn't dismiss. The activities, though, the, even on those two, the wildlife guardians didn't really prevail in those two claims. The judge just remanded it back to the Army Corps to make a determination of whether cleaning out the stilling basin would affect silvery minnow or other endangered species. And if so, then they would have to consult with the service. So essentially, I think the service is going to find that there is no effect, and so they don't have to consult, and then the case will be dismissed. And it is a big it is a big ruling because it did confirm that the Army Corps of Engineers does not have discretion over the daily operation about ESA issues in the Rio Grande. So that was that's something that has been an open question that we can. So it's good to have that clarification now, and so I think it'll help us in our other in the Middle Rio Grande ESA collaborative program to work with the Corps on some projects and moving forward. Now that this legal issue has been cleared up, they have money that's available that they can use to help the species and to improve habitat in the Middle Valley.
Thanks, Chris. Moving on for the GOM, the New Mexico Interstate Dream Commission et al., the Court of Appeals. Staff attorneys did file our response brief on Friday, June 15th this year. Mr. GOM has requested an extension to August 3rd. So we will hear from his, we'll hear that extension at the beginning of August. With regards to Texas v. New Mexico and Colorado, original action 141. It's on our agenda a little bit later today, but I think the main task at hand right now is there's a response due to New Mexico's answers and counterclaims. The response is due by Texas and the United States July 23rd, 2018. With regard to the Pecos Basin protests, there's no action report this time. Moving on to the Colorado River Basin, with regards to storage, I think I draw your attention to the table and looking at reservoir storage at Lake Powell, 53% full, Navajo Reservoir at 71% full, and I'll add to that in a moment, where the precipitation forecast sort of bounced around a little bit. So, but suffice to say, we can see the most probable stream flows from the NRCS are not very good. And then moving on, what I want to highlight in this staff report is meetings that took place last week in Santa Fe. There was two separate meetings with regards to the Colorado River. The first meetings was with the 7 basin states, and it was to discuss the drought contingency planning effort that is underway by both the upper unit and lower unit of the Colorado River. I'll note that that was attended by, well, first I'll note that it was chaired by New Mexico's compact commissioner. It's the
I thought it was a
commissioner. Okay, compact commissioner to the Colorado Compact. Secretary Blaine, State Engineer Blaine. And so we hosted the meeting in Santa Fe. But also in attendance was Commissioner Berman from Bureau of Reclamation, the two area managers from the Upper and Lower Basin, Commissioner Berman's deputy, Dave Palumbo, in addition to a number of other senior staff from Reclamation. Plus, they came with their top people out of their Denver Technical Office to give us an overview of what the hydrology currently is shaping up as they best understand it. I think to show that kind of, let's just say, firepower from Reclamation really is something to take note of. The meeting started off, and I'll just sum it up with one statistic. After a review of the paleo record, which goes back 1,200 years, it was determined this past year was the 19th driest year in the last 1,200 years. This caught everybody, I think, by, I don't want to say surprise, but certainly punctuated the severity of the situation on the Colorado River. From that meeting, it was agreed that by this August, the 7 basin states are to have draft agreements together for both the upper and lower units to review drought contingency plans, companion agreements, and other internal agreements within the states and within the upper and lower units. This is a daunting task, to say the least, and our staff is going to be really this summer extraordinarily focused, if nothing else, to get these agreements together for consideration by the 7 basin states. In addition to that, the Commissioner Berman set the deadline of the CRUA meeting in, I think, mid-December to have the documents substantially completed. There's one state that will not be able to sign off on the documents, and that's the state of Arizona. They need legislative authority to sign off on those documents, and they will not be able to get that by time of the CRUA. However, Arizona did commit to signing another agreement indicating their willingness to go along if the agreements are acceptable with the proposed drought contingency plans and other related agreements. The next day, there was a Upper Colorado River Commission meeting. There was a regular work meeting, and it's regular, I guess they have three times a year compact meetings. By and large, the work meeting focused on kind of debriefing from the meeting the day before, and I should just note that during this regular meeting, it was more or less standard business, but I think there is one note that this commission probably would appreciate. The current executive director, Don Osler, is retiring at I think Sunday is his last day, though he will be held on as a contractor. And the new executive director is our old general counsel, Ms. Amy Haas. So we've got a New Mexico presence on the Upper Colorado Compact Commission, and I think we should be rather proud that we have somebody of that caliber in that position.
Eric, I would like to take this opportunity to say that maybe we should say our previous general counsel. You said the old.
Previous old general counsel.
Former. How about former general counsel? Thank you. Thank you, Secretary. So I think that highlights on the Colorado River. I mean, there's a number of different issues, but that's really the main issue as really these drought contingency plans and the associated plans with implementing those plans and others that are required to implement the minute that was passed last fall, signed last fall, which provides opportunities for shortage sharing between Mexico and the lower unit, which is essential to keep Lake Mead afloat. This is pretty serious stuff, and with the hydrology as poor as it is right now, obviously all eyes are on next winter, and we anticipate hearing more about the Colorado in the coming months. Moving on to the Gila San Francisco Basin, I think probably one of the significant items is that the notice of intent to prepare an EIS for the New Mexico unit of the Central Arizona project was published in the Federal Register on June 12, 2018. Copy is supposed to be attached. We can get that copy of the NOI to electronically distributed. And this officially begins the NEPA process. So we are underway with scoping meetings, and the first meeting will be this Monday in Albuquerque at the State Bar in Mexico, Rody Classroom. We are aware that it is going to be a well-attended meeting. We're expecting between 200 and 300 people to be there. We've been notified that there will be protests and the like. So this Monday, just be alert that we will be having our first public meeting to solicit comment related to the proposed action for the New Mexico unit. And then in the information that's provided has the remaining dates. There's going to be a number of meetings both in Arizona and in New Mexico. There's going to be 4 in New Mexico aside from the Albuquerque meeting and 3 in Arizona. In previous discussions, we've talked about perhaps revising the joint powers agreement with the CAP entity to address potential use of the unit fund monies for non-unit projects. And we are going to be prepared to present this coming July meeting on the details of that JPA and where that process is at. Moving on to the Rio Grande Basin. I got the updated numbers from the chart that is provided with regards to storage, and I think there's a couple of statistics that stand out. If we look at El Vado, at the end of last month, more or less, we had about 42,000 acre feet of storage, 23% available storage. Currently, we're at 19,500 acre feet of storage, or 11%. I note this particular reservoir because this is an indicator of native inflows. And suffice to say, we are seeing some rather extraordinary numbers, not just in the Chama, but throughout the upper Rio Grande Basin. Almost on a daily basis, we're seeing all-time instantaneous flow low values by, in some instances, 100 CFS. So we are really seeing the manifestation of the poor winter that we had. I also bring your attention to Elephant Butte, which in the packet that's handed out is at 300,000 or 19%. At this point, Elephant Butte has been drawn down to 230,000 acre feet, or about 12% of capacity. We believe, and it's my understanding from Reclamation, that at this point, they more or less expect Elephant Butte to be drawn down to the dead pool, barring any type of carryover that is in operation, obviously this week. But it is going to be quite a someone to be sure. With regards to water operations, I want to really emphasize I want to emphasize the coordination between the state engineer's district office 6 and the commission staff. There has been an extraordinary effort to ensure that we are watching the flows, both that are being taken out of the river by the acequias, but also watching the flows at La Puente, which is an indicator gauge for the native flows. The last I saw La Puente, it's at 16 CFS. Anything less than 50 requires curtailment, and the District 6 office has initiated curtailment of acequias below average. Obviously, this is not a difficult situation, but I would commend both the District 6 staff and the commission staff for their collaborative efforts to keep an eye on the flows, keep an eye in case there's over diversions, and to be able to continue accounting as we go forward in our calendar year and accounting for the compact. The second major point I would make with regards to that is at this point in time, we don't have specific numbers, but we are anticipating, at least as of today, to a low delivery into elephant relative to our index flows. We don't have, we haven't run anything specific at this point, but I think it's fairly apparent, given the hydrologic conditions, that we may be looking at an under delivery this year. And with regards to that, I can put it into perspective. Moving on to the Endangered Species Act issues, the Santa Acacia Reach, I think it's just below, just above Bosque del Apache, has basically been about 20 miles of river drying. We've had a fish rescue operation, egg rescue operation, but what we see is every once in a while we do get a little rain, and that causes a spawning, and the crews go out and try to collect any eggs that we can to bring those eggs, put them upstream to continue the viability of that species. In addition, we're starting to see the Isleta Reach dry. We've had as much as 1.5 miles of drying so far this season since the last commission meeting. And with 19,000 acre feet left in El Vado, the native water will be water passing through the system, and I would anticipate either sometime in July, perhaps, and talking with MRCCD is when we would anticipate seeing probably significant more drying of the Isleta Beach. I want to make a note with regards to the executive committee on the ESA collaborative program. We met yesterday, and we're going through I would describe a major overhaul of the bylaws. And one of the significant changes that I think the commission should be aware of is they are exploring changing the governance in terms of how decisions are made and moving to a consensus-based process. In other words, all parties have to agree in order to be able to take any action, and that has been received, I think, fairly well. And people do have some good questions about that, but a number of members of that committee, myself included, have been involved with that kind of consensus building decision making. We find that my experience and others' experience is that you have better decisions rather than we see in the past where we have split decisions, which invariably leads to conflict. Moving on to the Canadian, obviously we have the youth fire in the Canadian. This past May it started. It's fairly well contained now. I think that's probably the major event that occurred in the Canadian. One thing I would like to mention to the commission, and I apologize if this is happening a little bit late, but tomorrow is the kickoff of a week-long celebration of Eagle Nest Dam. It's its 100th year anniversary. I plan on attending the opening ceremonies tomorrow, along with the dam caretaker and others, and so that's going to be a fun event. And it's I think, a testament to some of the forethought of our predecessors to build storage facilities. And as our dam caretaker noted, that the water necessary to help bring the Youth Park fire under control essentially all came from Eagle Nest Reservoir. And without that, there would not have been a water supply. Moving on to the Costilla, there has not been any significant changes from last report. Moving on to the Pecos, there's been, I think, a couple of notable activities. First, on May 31st, 2018, a team from New Mexico met with the River Master along with a team from the state of Texas, excuse me, to try to resolve with the River Master the evaporative loss issue associated with Texas's stored water in New Mexico's reservoirs due to significant flooding in 2014 and held water in 2015. Unfortunately, we got close to we're just a few thousand acre feet apart to having an agreement, and I would have preferred to have been able to report we had an agreement, but unfortunately, Texas kind of had a hard and fast number and was not unwilling to move off of that number, and so an agreement was not reached. And we'll brief the commission in closed session as to how we're going to move forward, addressing the court and the River Master with regards to original action 65. On to the good news, our preliminary accounting for 2017 for our deliveries. The River Master initial accounting shows a almost 21,000 acre feet overage, which if that bears out, looks like we would have just under 160,000 acre feet of credit on the Pecos, so that obviously is a positive development. With regards to the 2003 Petco settlement agreement, we are continuing to engage with the irrigation districts primarily, well, for two reasons. One, to try to come up with a long-term plan to address some of the challenges of meeting the requirements the commission has to have minimum storage amounts for Carlsbad Irrigation District. But really what we're looking at right now is in the event that we do not get a good monsoon this year, we're anticipating having to start pumping as early as November 1st. And the irrigation districts are working together with the state engineer's office and the commission staff to try to really identify basically every drop of water we can find to ensure that we meet the March 1st requirement, 50,000 acre feet of storage for Carlsbad Irrigation District in order to avoid a priority call. Those meetings went very well. I'd like to thank the United States Bureau of Reclamation. They contracted with a facilitator who I think has done a fair job of bringing the conversation around. Without the facilitator, we kind of went into our corners, and that was that. And this facilitator has been able to bring out kind of let's think out of the box type of approach, which is really, I think, benefited everyone, Carlsbad, PBACD, and the commission. Finally, on the PECOS, I would note that with regards to the biological opinion, 2018 has been considered a critically dry year, and this designation allows for some greater flexibility in operations of the Carlsbad project. I think this is, as the summer wears on, if we do not get monsoons, this is going to be a very good tool to be able to both maintain the species, but also to have flexibility in having to meet some of the biological requirements. Finally, I'd like to conclude with the state water plan. Under water planning, we are on the cusp of issuing our first draft state water plan for public comment. I think our last state water plan did not have a public comment period, nor a draft for the public to comment on. Everything goes well with publishing. We anticipate to have that up sometime later today. And that will kick off a 30-day period for public comment. Our planning staff has put together an online process where the public can provide comments, as well as, of course, any written comments or other comments as the public sees fit. So I would like to just say to Lucia, I don't know if she's here today, she's working. I think everybody should give her a round of applause for the amount of work that she's doing. Get this state water plan out on time and within budget. So Lucia, thank you very much. With that, I could close on with some information on the drought, but I think we're all pretty aware of Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, John. Any questions, John?
Sure.
Yes, Commissioner Carter.
Question about, in terms of the meeting with the river master, who represents us on that? Who represented us?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Thorpe, we were represented at that meeting by Charles DeSalen, who has since left the commission, as part of the preparation, and of course we knew Charlie was going to be moving. Our current, we have a contract counselor, is Jeffrey Wexler, I'm calling Andrews, who has extensive experience working with interstate disputes, and so right now he is our legal counsel.
So no staff involved?
We are, with regards to the PECOS, our Charlie's position has been, necessary paperwork has been submitted to State Personnel Office, which is now running our HR, and we're waiting a word back to be able to advertise that position. Once we can get that advertisement up, then we will have staff be able to re-engage with that. But to kind of hold this over, we've brought in an expert in interstate litigation matters with regards to compacts until such a time we get Charlie's position. So we're just waiting at this point, we're supposed to advertise.
Any other comments? Mr. Sanchez?
Just a couple regarding the renewal and I guess efforts that are undergoing or underway with the drying of this river. Do you know if, as part part of the efforts of water quality monitoring taking place at the same time to track any changes in water chemistry with the drought that might affect habitat for the species?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Sanchez, certainly I'm aware that they do temperature monitoring. With regards to water quality, Paige, do you have any thoughts?
I'm gonna defer to Grace on that, do you know?
Doing anything more than temperature?
Commissioner Sanchez, not to my knowledge. I think they're mostly looking at DO and temperature.
So you're being dissolved.
The other question, who's in the PECO's talks, who's the facilitator?
Oh, who's the facilitator? Joe. Anna?
Yeah, Chairman Sanchez, director along with Commissioner Sanchez. His name is Joe McMahon, and he's out of Colorado. He specializes in mediation of water-related issues in the West.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? If not, thank you. Secretary Blank?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for looking at the schedule for the agenda. On June 6th and 7th, I met with our tribal liaison, Myron Armijo, our OSC Deputy General Counsel, Terry Ann Singer, ISC Administrative Assistant, Gloria Varela, and our Public Information Officer, Melissa Smith, and we attended the annual state tribal summit at Acoma Pueblo. And I'll have to say that Acoma really set the bar high. I mean, they were just gracious hosts, had a very enjoyable, I'll say, meeting and after meeting events. So very, very productive time we had with the tribes and pueblos at that summit. The State Tribal Collaboration Act mandates that yearly summits with all of the cabinet level agencies in order to develop policies to promote beneficial collaboration between state and tribal governments and provide annual reports on the accounts of each agency and the accomplishments pursuant to the act. Some of the focus topics this year were directed towards the opioid crisis, infrastructure development and collaboration, drought and its effects on New Mexico, and development of New Mexico for the nationwide public safety broadband network. All of them very interesting topics. I do have to note that after our state CIO for DoIT made their presentation, I couldn't get some of the IT equipment to work. So I blamed it on the previous presenter. I presented along with Governor Suazo, and we had a very more like a chat on drought in New Mexico and how it affects the tribes and pueblos in New Mexico, cultural events, and how water is needed to celebrate some of the traditional events that they have on all of the tribes and pueblos in New Mexico. Very, very successful and well-received presentation between myself and the governor. On as Director Longwood briefed on 14th and 15th of June, we were in Roswell for the settlement talks on the PECOS and CID issue with the mediator, and I am very optimistic on the progress that we're making on those talks at this time. Again, just kind of a recap of the Colorado River Compact Commission meeting that was held on June 19th and 20th. I think that it shouldn't be lost on all of the states that the commissioner and her top staff were at that 7 states Compact Commission meeting. And it is very significant, as Director Longworth pointed out. I think it will usher in the development of the drought contingency plan for the lower basin and get some movement in that, which is a necessary component, even affecting minute 232, 323, with the international agreement that we have with Mexico. So there's a lot riding on the development of the drought contingency plan. In our water rights division, we've seen or kept the backlog down to the low 400s, which is very significant, especially in times of drought, because most people think of these times and start wanting to do applications and make changes in their water rights, which really makes a spike in the number of applications that are being filed. But we've been able to keep those down to below our performance measure of 600 backlog applications, down into the low 400s. So I really appreciate the staff and the efforts that they make in keeping those numbers down. Last meeting, we talked about the 2 deep wells in Sandoval County and some of the final completions that we're waiting on at our last meeting. And the special equipment arrived, and the driller has mobilized and is installing that equipment now. So that should be complete by first part of next week. That will give us protection both to prevent leaks and discharges to the surface, but also ensure the protection and non-communication between aquifers, that deep saline water and the freshwater aquifers above. OSC staff presented and met with the Acequia met on the Acequia mapping project. Presentation was given to the New Mexico Acequia Association, Department of Homeland Security, and the New Mexico New Mexico Acequia Association, along with the UNM Earth Data Analysis Center called EDAC. And the purpose of the Acequia mapping program is to create a project that will identify infrastructure that is owned and operated by individuals, acequias, that if an event happened, a flood that washed out their headworks, if they weren't part of the New Mexico Hazard Mitigation Plan in the flood description of vulnerability narrative, they would not be eligible for FEMA funds to replace those structures. I think this is probably one of the most critical projects that we have in this state to ensure protection of these acequias in the event of a catastrophe or a disaster that would wipe these things out. Like I said, it puts them on the list to be eligible for federal funding to bring them back into operation. Otherwise, they have no funding source through FEMA for reconstruction of headworks if they get washed out. As part of the Acequia mapping project, EDAC consolidated existing data from the Office of State Engineer, the New Mexico Acequia Association, and the USGS National Hydrologic Data Set in order to combine all of the relevant line data into one conveyance layer. And that will be used for general mapping purposes throughout the state. EDAC also prepared attribute tables for the acequias so that ownership, maintenance, contact information, and conditions could be reassessed. And that is very important in order to keep that database up to date, to ensure that that if an event happens, it establishes a maintenance record of their facilities that shows that they've maintained maintenance and continued operations of their facilities. So it just helps in the record keeping and provides information to the federal agencies for funding eligibility. John mentioned a little bit about the CHAMA and curtailment. We're in the second week of our water masters implementing curtailment in the shortage sharing activities on the Rio Chama. Everything is going well so far. I've met several times with our district manager, Brian Gallegos, who has really done a great job in organizing and coordinating all of the activities of the water masters on the Chama. One of the challenges that we have and we continue to meet is protection of water for contract water or other water in the stream system that belongs to somebody else, but the acequias see the water in the river and they want to appropriate that water and use it for their use. Our water masters have been very persistent and consistent in shepherding that water past these other diversions in order to get it to the place where it is contracted to be used or has been allocated for use. I have worked with both the district manager, Brian Gallegos, and our division director, John Romero, in making sure that we do have coverage for protection of the water on weekends and even in the evenings. Some of the staff are putting in 60, 70 hours a week, which is very much appreciated and very much necessary. We did have a productive meeting with the Jemez, Zia, Pueblo, and the non-Pueblo Acequia members, and that took place last Thursday here in the Albuquerque office. The Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Bureau of Reclamation also attended that meeting. The purpose of the meeting was to talk about shortage sharing and cooperative efforts in order to protect users on the Jemez River and to ensure that agreed upon schedules are met and still agreeable with all of the members. I think we did a very good job in meeting with the parties on that, and so far we look like we're going to make it through this drought season without any major blowups. We keep working on those things every day to ensure that that we do accomplish that. On May 22nd, there were a number of us, Director Longworth, myself, Myron Armijo, and Ariane Singer traveled to Zuni Pueblo on the west side of the state, and we met with them along with Lucia Sanchez to talk about comments and how to integrate the Pueblo's concerns into the state water plan. As reported, the state water plan will go out and be subject to public comment, and we were just incorporating some of the questions and some of the issues that they brought up at the state tribal summit. And this was a follow-on meeting to talk about how their comments could be incorporated and how they should interact with the agencies. Right now, I'd like General Counsel Greg Ridgely to give an update on just some of the high-level legal issues that we've been dealing with over the last month. So, Mr. Ridgely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. I'll just talk on three things. There's been a lot going on the last month or so. Several of these matters have been in the press, so you've probably been paying attention to them. First is a lot of litigation or attempts to take to the Supreme Court the appeal of the Navajo Nation water rights settlement with the state of New Mexico. On April 3rd, the Court of Appeals issued its decision upholding the district court's 2013 decision to approving the settlement agreement between the state and the Navajo Nation and entering the partial final decrees for the water rights of the Navajo Nation pursuant to that settlement. That decision by the Court of Appeals in early April has resulted in multiple petitions to our Supreme Court to requesting the court to review that decision. There are several petitions requesting review by opponents of the settlement, but also the state of New Mexico filed its own petition asking the Supreme Court to take up the appeal, and that's unusual because the state prevailed in the Court of Appeals decision, but in our view, for some troubling, because there is some troubling reasoning and statements in the Court of Appeals decision, we've asked the Supreme Court to take up the case. In particular, to the state's petition pointed out two problems in the Court of Appeals decision. One, there's some statements that declare that because the waters of the San Juan River, the San Juan River is an interstate stream, the state of New Mexico has no ownership interest in those waters. And that is a very troubling statement that we think is contrary to the Constitution and longstanding case law in our state. And second, the Court of Appeals decision unfortunately relied on what we believe is erroneous reasoning relating to preemption by federal preemption of New Mexico law. The Court of Appeals concluded that once the Congress passed the United States, once the Congress of the United States passed the Settlement Act, that preempted New Mexico law with respect to the Navajo Nation water rights settlement. And that is also something very troubling. If it's allowed to stand, it could make it very difficult for the state of New Mexico to engage in future negotiations with tribes to resolve their Indian water. The Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Water Utility Authority and the City of Gallup also filed their own petition asking the Supreme Court to take up this appeal for some of the same reasons that I've just described that the state recited in its petition. And then lastly, and this is something that is on the agenda at the closed session later today, a group of 10 legislators filed a separate petition. This one is a different type of petition. All the other petitions are for petitions for writ of certiorari, which is a Latin phrase. Don't ask me what it means because I don't know what it means. But this is a writ that allows that the Supreme Court uses to take cases on appeal, essentially. The legislators have filed a different asked for a different writ of mandamus, asking the Supreme Court to issue a writ prohibiting the Interstate Stream Commission, the state engineer, and the office of the state engineer from implementing the Navajo Nation water rights settlement, and asking also that the settlement be placed before the legislature for legislative approval. Yeah, we'll talk about that later in the agenda. Second matter that's been in the news recently, and this is in the last week or so, the New Mexico State Land Commissioner has filed another petition for writ of mandamus, this time against the state engineer. This is a challenge by the Land Commissioner to the state engineer's issuance of permits under Section 7212 1.3, which is a section of our water code that allows the state engineer to issue temporary one-year permits to use up to 3 acre-feet of water, underground water, for construction or other projects related to mineral development. That is currently pending before the State District Court in Santa Fe. Lastly, another writ petition that had been dormant is now coming up. Wild Earth Guardians 2 years ago filed in the district court, filed a petition for writ of mandamus against the state engineer, asking the court to order the state engineer to require Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District to file a proof of beneficial use for their water rights. That was filed, as I said, 2 years ago, and nothing really happened with that case. The Wild Earth Guardians did not take action to move the case forward. The court, on its own, just recently noted that it's been over 2 years, alerted the petitioners that the court was about to dismiss the petition, so they have requested a hearing. There is now a hearing scheduled before the judge on July 20th. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my.
Thank you, Secretary Blaine. Any questions, Secretary? If not, moving on. The Water Planning Committee met this morning. As John mentioned in his report, the state water planning draft is done. It will be posted at the end of today. It consists of 3 parts. One is the water policies, the second part, the technical report, and the third part are legal landmarks. It's quite an accomplishment in a short period of time with limited resources. And as we mentioned earlier, the CIA and everyone involved deserves a lot of credit. And it will be posted for comment for 30 days. There will be a link hopefully by the end of today to do that. And all members of the commission will get an email with a PDF of the plan soon. So that's our report. Moving on, it's time for work plan considerations. The first one is the Rio Grande. There are 2 parts to it. One is ESA, and the second part is just a general work plan. Grace, I think you're up first.
Hope the state is coming now. Okay. Good morning, Chairman Sanchez and Commissioners, Director Longworth, and Secretary Lane. My name is Grace Haggerty, and I'm a senior hydrologist with the Rio Grande Bureau. And I'm also the Basin's program manager for ESA activities. I'm here with Allison Hudson. She's the manager for the Los Lunas Severino Refugium, and I wanted to introduce or reintroduce her to you. Allison plays a vital role for our agency, both in biology, genetics, and also fish production. Allison, could you say a few words about yourself before I begin discussing your work?
So again, Allison Hudson, and I'm the supervisor at Los Lunas Severino Refugium. So we have 3 total staff, including myself, and we work not only with the collaborative program, but we work to produce Rio Grande Severino for reintroduction into the river. We also do scientific research on it.
Thank you, Allison. Okay, and before you to request approval of the Rio Grande Basin Bureau's Endangered Species Act Work Plan for FY 2019, this work plan is proposed to continue our commitments related to the 2016 Middle Rio Grande Biological Opinion for water operations and river maintenance. And I'm going to be referring to that as the 2016 BO. And engagement with the Middle Rio Grande Collaborative Program, which I will be referring to as the program for short. I wanted to point out in our audience that we have Julie Dickey here. She is one of the West employees who is the third-party program manager for the collective program, Julie. And also Mike Hammond, who you all know very well, is with the MRGCD, and he's involved both in the biological opinion and with the minority grant program. In the 2016 BO, the Fish and Wildlife Service approved a more adaptive and flexible approach for water operations for protecting species in their habitats. Instead of flow targets and other directives, the service is expecting water managers to use their available resources judiciously, such that fish densities can achieve, shall we say, healthy numbers for the majority of the 15 years of the BO. The 2016 BO covers the water management actions of reclamation, the Office of the State Engineer and Interstate Stream Commission, the MRGCD, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The Army Corps of Engineers actions are not included in this BO. We plan to continue to work closely with the OSC Reclamation MRGCD to ensure effective and efficient use of funds and staffing to accomplish a number of new commitments that are described in the BO. Staff also proposes to continue working with the program, and especially program signatories such as the Water Authority and other non-federal entities who are not part of the 2016 BO to address ESA issues in the most collaborative and effective way possible. In FY 2019, we proposed 7 tasks to focus our efforts on, and these are described individually in the work plan presented to you in more detail than I have time for today. The total request for this work plan is $965,000. The 7 tasks for FY 2019 are to continue the Fish Passage pilot project that we started last year for the 7 Cassia diversion dam. We've made good progress on this project, and we expect that the modifications to the structure are done this fall. If they're done this fall by MRDCD and Reclamation, that we can complete most of our work in the upcoming fiscal year. The second task is to conduct habitat restoration in the 3 beaches with an emphasis on the Isleta and Santa Cassia beaches. And I'm happy to announce that we have successfully completed projects in the Isleta and Santa Cassia beaches just this year using some state funding. Most of the work in FY 19 will concentrate on monitoring projects, project planning and site maintenance. And this summer, due to the drought, I think we'll also be concentrate some of our efforts on refugia habitat utilization. We plan to operate the Severi Minnow Refugium and participate in the captive propagation program with the service and the city of Albuquerque. And we have completed the detank installations, and we currently have Severi Minnow being produced in those tanks. The 4th task is to work on 2016 BO compliance specific activities. The 5th task is to perform monitoring and adaptive management for spring and summer flows, similar to what we did in 2016, which was, if practical, we'll be testing the effectiveness of any reservoir modifications that are approved under the compact, Rio Grande Compact. We're continuing, the 6th task is to continue to participate in statistical analysis of the Severi Minnow population data. And we'll work on improvements to this monitoring program so that we can actually tell you whether our activities on the river are benefiting the species. And that's a really critical item that I think that ISC is very committed to. The last is to provide support to relevant program activities, such as external peer reviews, statistical analyses, on-the-ground projects to assist our agency. And we support efforts on drought issues that relate to ESA, and I also intend to seek external funding so that we can continue to work on many of these biological opinion and program activities. So thank you for your attention, Commissioner Sanchez and all the commissioners. And Allison and I will stand for questions or comments regarding the FY19 work.
Thank you, Grace. Just to clarify, so the 7 tasks you've identified in the work plan
Yes,
are pursuant to the action this body has taken with regard to the biological opinion, correct?
Commissioner Sanchez,
These are
that is
fulfilling those
correct.
commitments.
They are in line with the commitments that we received approval on from the commission.
Thank you. Any questions, Grace? Yes, Commissioner Thorpe.
Mr. Chairman, Grace, what was your budget for similar things this last year?
During this last year, we had a budget of, I wrote that down, let me check that, of $1,235,200. And our average, Commissioner Thorpe, has been $1.2 million over the last 20 years that we've been funding ESA on the mill rate.
In looking at the various projects that the way you have these broken down, there seems to be the type of contractual services that you're thinking that you may need. They seem to be the same for virtually all of the projects. Is that I'm going to assume, at least I hope this is the case, that this doesn't duplicate any efforts that have been made in the past, or that it is a requirement. I mean, it's new work that has to be done.
Commissioner Thorpe, yes. Many of these projects are continuation projects of things that we began, particularly after the 2016 BO commitments were presented to the commissioners, and also the 2016 BO was put in place. So it's been about 2 years that some of these projects are fairly new projects, such as the pilot channel, or the fish passage pilot project. Some of them are also continuation projects, such as we've created quite a bit of habitat restoration that has provided overbank habitat for minnow, and we have done continuation of monitoring, but all of them have been studies that have improved the science of they're just not repetitive monitoring projects, they're improving the science on the silvery minnow.
As it relates
Did that answer your question? I'm sorry.
Thank you. The other question I had is that I think in 1 or 2 or 3 of these, there's an indication that there may be a requirement for specialized services that, and I'm wondering if that is in addition to the budget that you have of the $965,000, or if that's included in the $965,000.
Commissioner Thorpe, thank you for that question. It is all inclusive in the $965,000. The specialized services are for addressing issues with the service as they come up. So we would have a cost ceiling limit for any of that and utilize it as needed, but it's still within that budget number.
And those would be items that would be authorized by the director, is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman,
Based on the delegated authority.
authority, yes.
Yes, based on
All within that
delegated.
delegated authority. Anything beyond that, that would come from.
Yes, Director Longworth signs all of our work orders and contracts and reviews them for completeness and application.
But that all falls under that $965,000.
Yes, Commissioner Thorpe, it does.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, is there a motion to approve? Is there a second? A motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is the Rio Grande work plan, page. Now to remind staff, we've got the materials, we've read them, so please just summarize.
Good morning, Commissioners. Chris Age and I are going to present the Middle Rio Grande work plan. And I just want to make a point of clarification. The title of this work plan is the Middle Rio Grande work plan. The title on the agenda and on the front page of the work plan is correct. We have a slight clerical error, so the subsequent pages of the work plan itself have an extra word. It says compact entitled. But the important thing is that the content of the work plan is exactly the same as what was noticed in the agenda.
Thank you.
So the main function of the Middle Rio Grande work plan is to assist with planning, evaluating, and maintaining long-term compliance with the Rio Grande Compact. This specific work plan this year contains 8 tasks, which Chris and I will discuss in more detail. Specifically, we're requesting these work tasks for FY 2019 with a total budget request of $1,005,000. So Chris is going to describe the first 3 tasks, and I'll do this.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, I'm just going to quickly go through the first several elements, and then we'll finish. We'll get through all 8 real quick here. The element number 1 for the U.S. Geological Survey, there's no action required at this time from the Commission. You have previously approved the budget for that element at the May meeting. I just wanted to give you a quick update that we just received the joint funding agreement that we are going to enter into with the U.S. Geological Survey, and we're reviewing that, and we'll be routing it for signatures hopefully here within the next 8 weeks or so. And so there's no action required on that element. The element number 2 for the water salvage and vegetation management, in particular for the LPU Delta Channel work, is part of our technical services agreement work with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, and also some of the private contractor work we've undertaken for river maintenance activities on Rio Grande. And our request for this work plan element is that the Commission authorized $250,000 to be transferred to the Bureau of Reclamation pursuant to our existing technical services agreement. And our staff issues task orders against that money, so the Bureau then only performs work that we have authorized and approved for that. And then the second request under that element is that we would like to reserve the other $250,000 that's available for contractual work. We don't, as river conditions change and as prior to monsoon season, we don't really have a great handle on what exactly needs to be done yet, but when we would like that money to be available to use our contractor in the event that the sediment plugs and other kind of things form the river. And then the third request for that element is that we would like to issue a new RFP for river maintenance and habitat restoration work that Marcos would be in the lead on later this year. Marcos, is that correct?
The current contract that we have with the contractor expires on December 31st of 2018, and in order to hire a contractor to do additional work for the fiscal year, the agency would have to issue another RFP. They're requesting right now for the authority to issue that RFP prior to the contract expiring, so we can have another contractor available on January 1st. Award of that RFP will be brought to the Commission.
And then for our element number 3 for the Sanakashi Levee project, there is no action required of the Commission at this time. It's part of our ongoing cooperative work with the Army Corps and the MRDCD. And the the project is currently on hold pending some Wild Earth Guardians litigation with Corps. And I don't really have a update on that unless, on the actual litigation, unless you do, Chris.
I don't, I just, my understanding is that the litigation has been stayed, but I don't know what its status is.
On the other hand, they have completed the first 8-mile segment of that levee project, as we reported previously, that was protective of the city of Socorro. It's fully functioning and it is in good working order. So,
Okay, great, thanks, Chris. Task 4 is Strategic Water Reserve in the Rio Grande. We're requesting $90,000 for this, and that money would come from our Strategic Water Reserve revenues. There are no contractual services needed for this task. The funding just goes to pay our lease costs to the Village of Los Lunas and to Property Control Division for about 950 acre feet of rights that we lease for the Strategic Water Reserve. Task 5 is a review of water development projects, water rights transfers, and water management plans. The total budget for this task is estimated to be $40,000, and that's from the improvement to the Rio Grande Income Fund. This funding will go partly towards publishing the Santa Fe River Pair Basin study, and possibly also towards support for the protest process for 2 water rights applications that have the potential to impact our compact deliveries. Task 6 is ERGWAM refinements. ERGWAM, for those that aren't sure, stands for Upper Rio Grande Water Operations Model. And that's a comprehensive surface water model that's used to simulate river and reservoir operations. For FY19, work with ERGWAM will include continued engagement by our agency as a joint lead agency, include training of ISC staff, and development of a number of modeling modules future use by our staff. So we're requesting $75,000 from the Improvement to the Rio Grande Income Fund for ERGWAM. Chris is going to talk about Task 7.
Task 7 is our ongoing compact and mass balance and reservoir surveying that we've done for at least the last 6-7 years. The kind of the compact gauging element is part of what Secretary Blaine described in part on the work that's going on the Chama right now. ISC staff are assisting the District 6 staff and water masters in looking at the river losses and the river flows to help them with their management up there. And the other part of that element is some of our reservoir surveying that we do to make sure that the stage recorders are working correctly on the various reservoirs, particularly at Elephant Butte and also at Caballo, where we can detect if there are any issues with the stage recorders. And like we did last December, we discovered that there was some problems with the stage recorder, and we were able to get those fixed as a result of our survey. Ended up saving the state several thousand acre feet of compact delivery. So it's ongoing work that we feel is important, and we're requesting $50,000 of improvement of the Rio Grande Income Fund money for that effort.
And the last task is engagement and technical assessment with Reclamation's lower reach planning effort. The lower reach plan is part of a requirement of the 2016 BO, but it includes a number of projects that have the potential to impact depletions within the lower reach of the Rio Grande, which is the Santa Acacia reach, Santa Acacia Valley. We're proposing to work with Reclamation in that planning process and collect data and develop a linked surface water and groundwater model to evaluate the impacts of the proposed projects so that they don't negatively impact, and we hope it will positively impact our water conveyance through the Santa Acacia region. And this is a continuation of a project we started last year. So the total budget requested for FY19 is $250,000, from the improvement to the Rio Grande Improvement Fund. And that is the end of the Middle Rio Grande plan. If anyone has any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Commissioner Sanchez?
On the item number 2, the water salvage and the delta chain maintenance, when's the last time we performed work on that? It's not a yearly maintenance, right? It's like, I guess as needed or kind of depending on how much rotation takes place.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Sanchez, I believe that our staff member, Anders Lundahl, has been managing that work, and we utilized the Bureau of Reclamation out there early this year. It was kind of late last year, and I think they finished up in February of this year. But typically, we just evaluate the conditions down there on an annual basis or after big events like monsoons and then decide what kind of work needs to be done. But I think historically we have done work annually. There was maybe 2 years ago, we didn't do anything because everything was in very good condition down there, so we didn't expend the funds, or any funds on it that year.
But the year before, we did pretty major.
Right.
And we use local marsh, right? So I guess it's usually generally after we have this good flows and siltation occurs, then we'll come in behind and go through the cheap channel maintenance. Given we have to have this too much flow, we have to do that. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman, are there opportunities or needs that could or should be addressed during this period of low flows and low levels as you look at Elton that maybe we haven't really considered in the past to help meet our basic compact requirements?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Thorpe, that's a good question. I mean, certainly this year, we're being forced to look at all management options and coordination with all the different water management agencies to meet our needs. So yeah, it's a good opportunity, as they say. This bad year is a good opportunity to figure out how we deal with this coming year. And I think we're doing that every day right now, especially trying to figure out how to manage our native flows, especially up on the Chama and water storage and San Juan Chama water, how to manage it to contact.
I guess I would also add that we are and have been meeting with the Bureau of Reclamation, particularly looking at some of the drainage infrastructure, which is the water salvage feature of the Middle Valley, to see how we can rehabilitate some of these features to convey more water and get more water back into the river. A lot of the drainage infrastructure has been in disrepair for a lot of years, and there's, for example, large trees growing in the middle of some of that. They're just not conveying water as efficiently as they were designed to, and so we're working with them to rehabilitate some of those features. And I know the district is doing that as well with some of their own drainage features that they're responsible for. So it is a collaborative effort to try to do that. And then we're doing vegetation control at the reservoirs to try to eliminate the phreatophytes that are soaking up a lot of the water that we would rather not have used that way.
Would your efforts in those areas be covered under the budget that you have described here? I mean, if you go in and try to rehabilitate some of these areas?
Commissioner Thorpe, Mr. Chairman, yes. The way we approach the project is we work with Reclamation. We get a target list of the priority sites that need to be worked on, and we'll try to tackle one or two each year within the existing budget that's been approved. And so we wouldn't be asking for additional funds on top of what has been approved for this current year.
And that would be covered under task 2.
Right.
The water salvage management task.
Any other questions? If not, is there a motion to approve the work plan?
So moved.
Second. Motion and a second. Any discussion? If not, all in favor, aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next up is the Colorado River Bureau Work Plan, Paul Harms.
Chairman Sanchez and Commissioners, I'm Paul Harms, ISC staff. The Colorado River Program Manager, Rolf Schmidt-Peterson, prepared this work plan and budget, and he planned to present it last week. But when the meeting was changed, he already had to be out of town today, so he couldn't be here. Colorado River Bureau is focusing on 8 priority items this coming year. We are able to do most of the work with staff, but we do request some money for contracting. We have 8 tasks listed in our work plan. The first one is Colorado River Basin Drought Contingency Planning. This involves all 7 basin states and was discussed on by Director Longworth in his report. Number 2 is San Juan River Basin Recovery Implementation Program. This is work deals with the endangered fish in the San Juan River program that we've been involved with since the 90s. Number 3 is Upper Colorado River Commission Planning and Coordination. This is a little bit of a new one this year, and that we're working with the Upper Colorado River Commission, a commission of 4 of the basin states, to help with some of their work that they will contract for. Number 4 is Upper Colorado River Commission Consumptive Use Assessment Project. This is a program that we do with through the Upper Colorado, along with the Upper Colorado River Commission. We also have the benefit of some Office of the State Engineer people helping us. We don't have any budget on that one. We think we can do that one all in staff. Number 5 is San Juan Consumptive Use Crop Survey. Again, we think we can do that one all in staff with the help of the Office of the State Engineer personnel. Number 6, development of the Natural Reservoir Top Water Bank. $10,000 on that one. Number 7 is support and development of the Animas La Plata release routing process. This also is a new one for this year. This was somewhat initiated by the San Juan Water Commission and Aaron Chandler, and they met with some of our staff and State Engineer Blaine and the Aztec Office of the State Engineer and some reclamation staff. And, one of the things that continued out of that meeting was the concern of how to get some of New Mexico's Animas La Plata water, if needed, down from Lake Nighthorse near Durango to the Farmington area. And that's $15,000 request. And then task 8 includes a number of ongoing projects and programs that we may have some contract help with, so we have a budget there of 45,000. And total for the Colorado River Bureau work plan is $190,000. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Paul. Any questions for Paul from Colorado? If not, is there a motion to approve? Yeah, sorry.
One question on task one. We have $45,000, $20,000 is for winter weather modification. How is that going to be used?
That's for cloud seeding, and that is managed within the state of Colorado. It's actually pretty much a basin-wide program, and even some of the lower basin states, some agencies in those states send money to Colorado for the cloud seeding. The 20,000 that we supply is directed toward cloud seeding in the San Juan Mountains, toward tributaries that will flow into New Mexico. So we're hoping to get some direct benefit that way.
And is this just for summer monsoon or also winter?
It's used in the winter to try to increase snowpack.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Task 7, I'm sort of interested in this week, what was the determination of at what point do you start releasing water from the watershed? How is that going to be implemented?
And that's what we're investigating, Commissioner Gonzalez, and because it hasn't been done before. And but San Juan Water Commission has animals with a lot of water sitting in Lake Night Horse that they can use up to the range of 10,000 acre feet a year. And in this year, as you very well know, how dry the Animas is, how low the Animas is this year, and where our cities of Aztec and Farmington pull most of their water, that we may even depending on the range, we may even by late summer need to request some of that water. And so a lot of this money would go towards working out that process, working closely with the Aztec office of the city engineer, and trying to find the easiest way to get that water down to the San Juan Water Commission members.
Looking forward, 20, 30 years down the road, we need to establish some kind of plan to deliver that water to where we can use it for domestic use, either a pipeline directly in the farm today or some way to get that water down there.
Exactly.
There was a reason for that lake, and not just recreation. We need to get some funding.
Yes, particularly in the San Juan Basin, where we don't have the benefit of good groundwater, like cities like Albuquerque and Las Cruces have, we're reliant on surface water for all of our municipal use. We need to be able to take advantage of that storage there and possibly find other storage also.
Any other questions? Then, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Paul. Moving on to the Arizona Water Settlement Act work plan, Ollie.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, good morning. My name is Ali Afati. I'm the Gila Basin Manager. Today I'm here before you to present the FY 2019 GILA Arizona Water Settlements Act Work Plan. This work plan consists of 4 major tasks. Task number 1, because the ICE, as you all know, the Air District Commission is jointly with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation on the environmental compliance for the New Mexico Unit project. So the first task that we are requesting here in this work plan is NEPA and related services for the New Mexico Unit project. The contract for the NEPA contractor is managed by the Reclamation. What we are requesting here is basically, to the extent possible, to provide expert support to the staff, to represent the ISC and any potential studies that may be needed. Those studies will be jointly decided upon with Reclamation within the EIS management team. We are the estimated budget for this task is $200,000. This amount does not include, as I mentioned, the NEPA contractors or Reclamation's costs. Those costs are separately considered by the Commission. You all remember I was before you in May requesting Reclamation's budget. Task number 2 is on behalf of the New Mexico CAP entity, fund technical services related to the New Mexico Unit project. The estimated amount is $5,000, and in case specific technical services such as further modeling or field investigations are requested by the end. This task is a little bit different from the other tasks that we have. Based on the obligation that we have with the CAP, we have an MOU. They voted and requested that the ISC award a contract on behalf of them with regard to the engineering design related to the New Mexico Unit. So the process starts with the captain. They bring forward tasks, they approve scope of work, they bring that approved scope of work before the Commission. This does not start with the staff. As I said, we have an obligation, but the CAP entity has the design authority. That design authority was transferred by the Secretary of Interior to the CAP. We have the ISC, and this contract will expire June 29th, the end of next fiscal. And at that point, it will be upon the CAP entity as the holder of the design authority to determine how it wants to move forward with the technical services.
Is this in the CAP entity's budget?
It
is
is
over and above?
Mr. Chairman, this is separate. They have a line item in their annual budget that they bring forward for the Commission's consideration. It's called professional services. Essentially, any contractual agreements that we have, including engineering, legal services, all under that category. But that's different than this one. Under that line item, they have elected to hire their own contract engineer. That company is Stantec. Stantec is currently providing essentially most of the design elements for the CAP. The CAP entity has elected to transfer a lot of design activities from AECOM to Stantec. These are non-duplicative. What is remaining right now for AECOM is only water modeling.
Is it modeling related to the NEPA?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman. It is only to inform the NEPA process.
Thank you.
So, like I said, that's the estimated amount based on the experience that we have had in terms of the cap entities requests in the past is 500,000. We may not use that money if there's no request by the entity. Task number 3 is continuing with the oversight and administration of the non-New Mexico unit projects. You all know that the commission allocated $9.1 million in 2014 and 15. We are not requesting any budget in this work plan. That money has been set aside separately. So that is not part of this work plan. We're just reiterating our commitment, annual commitment toward the grantees and the respective funding that we have. And the last task, we have legal services. It consists of 2 major items: specialized legal services that we may need through the legal process, and also any legal support for any existing or potential future litigation regarding the Arizona license and or New Mexico. In general, the way I can summarize this work plan, it includes 2 major parts. The first part is legal support to the staff and legal services for the amount of $335,000. The second part is upon request by the captain, that's up to $500,000. And again, I should mention that obligation will end at the end of 2019. With that, the total estimated budget for this work plan is up to $835,000, and I hereby request approval.
So Ollie, John Longworth was report earlier talking about the public scoping meetings that are going to occur. How does that relate to or influence this work plan?
Mr. Chairman, most of the activities related to public scoping are funded through the basically what we call project plan process, through which the reclamation brings forward a budget request. The commission considers it and approves it, and then we transfer funds to reclamation for those activities. Those activities fall under the NEPA contractor's contract. Staff will participate, basically on behalf of the agency, Interstate Screening Commission. We think that there might be some needs moving forward in terms of providing expert support, because we have limited number of staff and we may not be able to fill in the gaps for all working groups. But in terms of the legwork for public scoping and all that, NEPA contractors in charge.
So some of the modeling that could occur under this work plan could be related to following up on the scoping meetings.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. Once the scoping process concludes, then basically the joint leads will consider all the public comments and then basically compare and contrast them, cross-check them with the screening criteria, and then develop the alternatives. Then the alternatives may or may not be needed to be modeled.
Thank you. Any questions, Wally? Commissioner Sanchez?
I guess just kind of follow up regarding the scoping meetings. And maybe I'm not clear, I didn't hear correctly. There is or isn't a 30% design at this time?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Sanchez, there basically at this level, in order to satisfy the NEPA process, there's no need to design the New Mexico unit up to 30% design. First, it needs to go through the NEPA process, and that basically the process that will lay out all the potential effects from the economic side, from the other resource topic side. Once there's a record of decision, that would be a good time to further design to a higher level. At this point, I don't know what the CAP entity may or may not want to do, but as far as I know, they have no plans to further design. They have plans to refine the elements of their proposed action to inform the NEPA process. But in terms of taking it all the way to 30% design before there's a federal decision, I'm not sure if the company has that determination.
Okay.
I don't want to talk on behalf of.
Sure, and I know it's kind of not on point we're talking about, but I guess, again, I'm kind of related to that in this whole process. I guess I'm confused because I thought that was, the package we're taking, that 30% design would be achieved in go forward with the new process, but you're saying that 30% design isn't needed necessarily to go forward. So
that is correct.
On my part, I'm kind of confused with how that kind of developed. So I was anticipating, because my follow-up question, but you've already answered that. When would we expect a 30% design to be reached? But at this point, there is no.
Exactly. Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Sanchez, the RFP that was issued on August 22. This was titled 30% design. It was mentioned in that RFP that it may or may not need to be taken all the way to 30% design. And then just briefly, AECOM delivered their contract once in 2016, and once in 2017. At both points, the CAP entity decided to shift gears and consider other options in terms of the budget. And then specifically with the 2017 one, they hired their own contractor. They tasked them with many of the past design elements related to my exclusion. And as I mentioned, what is left right now is just the version I'm using on.
Well, and I think and I understand how the project has kind of been refined to where it's going, but I still think it puts the project in a better light. Because that's intent that having a 30% design would be achieved, but it's really out of our hands. It's in the CAP entity's hands. But I guess that's kind of my concern about that, at least my original understanding of how that would be applied. It's not applied. Anyway, that's just my comments.
I think Dominique might have some further clarifications.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, good morning, members of the commission. So a quick couple of points of clarification. This is a little complicated because for a couple of reasons. In the AWSA, the ISC has a certain role, but the Act is very clear and the CUFA is very clear that the entity that will own and operate the New Mexico unit will be the New Mexico capital, not the ISC. So after the commission made a decision in 2014 to go forth with a diversion project, a New Mexico unit of the CAP, we wrote to the secretary, but then the entity was formed, and the entity requested that the Secretary of the Interior give them the design authority. They are going to contemplate next week at their public meeting, requesting the Secretary to also give them the authority to construct, operate, and maintain the New Mexico unit, so that they are in charge of this unit and this project. When the joint powers agreement that created the entity was signed, the entity, because it is formed by JPA, can only have the powers that all its signatories have. So it could not handle its own finances. It has two fiscal agents. One of them is the ISC. The other one is the city of Denver. The only contract that goes to the ISC as fiscal agent for the entity is the contract with A. And the reason for that is that when the entity was formed, the ISC was concerned that time was of the essence, and we wanted to make sure that there were technical experts available to start making progress right away. And so once the entity had its first meeting, we asked them, we started this procurement process on your behalf for a technical contractor. Do you want us to proceed with this or not? And they voted in a public meeting and they said, yes, please proceed with this and procure this contract. Now, Commissioner Sanchez is right that at the beginning of this process, we were hoping that there would be the 30% design available by the time the meeting started. That has not happened for a number of reasons. It is not an obstacle that cannot be overcome, especially because at this point, what the CAP entity envisions is a project that will use a lot of existing infrastructure. This is, I don't want to speak on behalf of Reclamation, but as these types of projects go, it's not a very big project compared to what it could be. So, because they're proposing to use a lot of existing infrastructure, there are things that already exist, which hopefully will simplify the NEPA process and reduce the expenses. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Not, is there a motion to approve? Is there a second? Motion is second. Any further discussion? All in favor, aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Not to vote for the show, but council.
Thank you. Recommend show Commissioner Ford did not vote on that. Moving on. The Petco Steel work plans. Hammond?
Good morning, Commissioner Sanchez. Commissioners, it is a pleasure to be with you this morning to present the Pecos Bureau's fiscal year 2019 work plans. I've asked Mr. Dan Davis to join me here. He is the technical supervisor for the Pecos Bureau, and I thought he might be able to assist in answering any questions that I can't. Because we have very limited time today, and because we are slightly behind schedule, my plan is to go through our work plans very quickly. I will summarize them briefly and identify any changes from last year that might be relevant or important for you all to know about. I'd also like to say, given that I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, I know that there are a number of new commissioners, and I really welcome you all to ask us questions anytime. So, hopefully your questions will be addressed right now, but otherwise I'm happy to assist in providing additional information at other times. Okay, so first up is the Pecos Endangered Species Act work plan. The total budget request associated with this work plan is $546,388. This work plan essentially supports the Pecos Bureau and the state of New Mexico in engaging in Endangered Species Act activities and monitoring of Endangered Species Act activities in the basin. Part of that includes participation in what's called the Pecos Hydrology Work Group. That group was formed after the listing of the Pecos Bluntnose Shiner and includes participants from the Bureau of Reclamation, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. Geological Survey, and the irrigation districts in the basin. And a large part of the work that group does is to monitor increased depletions on the river associated with altered reservoir operations for the fish. And what we do is we calculate every year what the increased depletions were, and then reclamation is required to make up that water so that there is no loss to New Mexico water users or impacts to our state line deliveries. So we participate in that effort in an ongoing way, including the modeling that goes along with those efforts. In addition, this work plan supports the Interstate Stream Commission's participation in the Texas Hornshell Candidate Conservation Agreement, which was approved by this commission back in February. and allows us to participate in review of Fish and Wildlife Service's species assessments. So we're keeping a careful eye on what they're looking at in terms of potential future listings and making sure that we have an opportunity to comment as necessary. Also, I should mention with regard to the horn shell, there's a possibility that Fish and Wildlife Service will be issuing a decision on critical habitat designation in the coming year, and we want to ensure our ability to comment on whatever decision is made there. In addition, through this work plan, we collect stream flow data at numerous locations throughout the basin. That data helps support decisions related to Endangered Species Act implementation, but also provides information that's valuable for the Interstate Stream Commission in ensuring that we meet our compact obligations. So it's a helpful check for us and just seeing what's going on in the basin in terms of stream flow. In addition, this work plan helps support our participation in two important studies. One is a salinity assessment that has been going on for a number of years in partnership with Texas. That study is run out of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and is looking at potential sites where mitigation could occur to address salinity inputs to the river. The other study is a Bureau of Reclamation basin study, and that project is slated for completion this year. It's been an ongoing project for a number of years, and essentially it's looking at what we might expect given the current climate models in the coming decades and how to prepare for those possible changes. And lastly, this work plan also includes the ability for us to participate in parallel agreements for the lease of water rights owned by BP Bar LLC north of Fort Sumner. We have an agreement with BP Bar and a parallel contract with the Bureau of Reclamation for lease of those water rights in support of Carlsbad Project ESA compliance. So this work plan, as I already said, or maybe let's just say the changes from last year, largely the biggest change from last year's work plan was our participation in the candidate conservation agreements with assurances for the horn shell. We want to ensure that we can participate in that, especially because there will be decisions. The total budget is $546,388. Of that, $191,000 will be coming from the Irrigation Works Construction Fund, and the portion related to the BP Bar lease, that is $355,388, is from our Strategic Water Reserve funds and is fully reimbursed by the Bureau of Reclamation. That agreement has no cost to the Interstate Stream Commission. We simply serve as a pass-through. With that, that concludes my remarks on this work plan, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you all may have.
Thank you, Hannah. Commissioner Thorpe?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the BP Bar water lease, are we actually getting any water from BP Bar today?
Commissioner Sanchez, Chairman Sanchez, Commissioner Thorpe, good question. Currently, that is, so it's a 25-year agreement. Currently, that water is simply not being diverted. So the idea is that there are passive benefits to the river by not diverting it. As we've discussed with you all in the past, Bureau of Reclamation is currently doing a cost-benefit analysis of a potential pipeline from the BP Bar property to Sumner Reservoir, in which case the water could be pumped from the BP Bar wells into the reservoir and then stored across multiple years for support of Carlsbad Project compliance with Endangered Species Act. In the meantime, we do have plans with Reclamation and BP Bar to transfer a portion of those water rights to the Vaughn Conservation Pipeline, where some of that water could be utilized there.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Not, is there a motion to approve the ESA work plan with second? Motion is second. Any further discussion? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to the conservation pipeline work.
Thank you, Commissioners. The next work plan from the Pecos Bureau is the Bond Conservation Work Plan, Pipeline Work Plan. The total budget for this work plan is $310,012. This work plan allows essentially for continued operations of the Bond Conservation Pipeline. So for those of you who may not be familiar, just south of Fort Sumner, there is a pipeline, 10 production wells and a pipeline that ISC has partnered with the Bureau of Reclamation on. That agreement went into place in 2007, and it allows for the Interstate Stream Commission to pipe water to the river just above the upper critical habitat reach for the Pecos Blunt-nosed shiner. Expenses associated with this project are reimbursed by the Bureau of Reclamation, but we serve in a partnership role in order to accomplish that end. And basically, it's another tool in Reclamation's toolbox in terms of trying to keep the river wet in dry times in compliance with the biological opinion for the Pecos Blunt-nosed shiner. Currently, the water rights permitted at the Bond Conservation Pipeline are 1,649 acre-feet per year. But as I just mentioned in response to the previous question from Commissioner Thorpe, there is a possibility we'll be transferring additional water rights from BP Bar into the well field there at Bond in the coming year. We have just completed drilling a new well earlier this month, which is exciting, out at Bond. And some of the work included in this work plan will be final installation of that well onto the pipeline so that we can be using it to deliver water to the river. This will help us likely retire an older, not as productive well from that well field and ensure that we can continue to provide approximately 8 CFS to the river when required by the Carlsbad project. There's nothing really new in this work plan from last year except for final installation of the new well that we drilled earlier this month. And I should say the budget, again, $310,012. Of that, $300,012 are from the Strategic Water Reserve funds, and those funds will be fully reimbursed by the Bureau of Reclamation. Also included in this work plan are $10,000 from the Irrigation Works Construction Fund, and that is there essentially in case there are expenses at the well field that cannot be reimbursed by Reclamation. We want to make sure that we can keep things running if minor things come up that are not reimbursable by Reclamation. And with that, we'll take questions.
Thank you, Hannah. Any questions?
Just one.
Yes,
Commissioner Hart. Mr. Chairman, as it relates to the possibility of the need for professional services and the director's authorization, I'm assuming that is included in your total budget as it was in one of the earlier ones.
Chairman Sanchez, Commissioner Thorpe, yes, it is.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve? The motion is a second. Motion is second. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to the Pecos settlement implementation work plan.
Thank you, Chairman Sanchez. Yes, next is the Pecos settlement implementation work plan. The total budget for this work plan is $2,352,387. Activities covered by this work plan include largely work related to the augmentation well fields established as required by the 2003 Pecos settlement agreement. We anticipate, as Director Longworth said in his comments earlier, there's a good chance we'll need to pump per the requirements of the settlement during fiscal year 19. And therefore, we've included funding in this work plan to cover equipping the wells. They have not been used or been required to be used by the settlement since 2013. And then we've also included approximately 3 months of operations. So both the cost to equip the wells and pump water to the river as required for about 3 months. If more than that is needed, we have worked with Marcos to create bar language, budget adjustment request language, where we could secure the funds necessary to continue operations beyond the 3 months. This work plan also covers ongoing maintenance, including work associated with the variable frequency drives on our wells and the SCADA equipment that has been newly installed in the well field, which allows us to collect data from the well field with more regularity. In addition, this work plan covers the implementation of ISC agreements with Seven Rivers Inc. and John Nelson. They are on-site operators, contractors at our 2 well fields, one in Seven Rivers and one in Lake Arthur. Our agreements with Seven Rivers in particular include the requirement to do monthly water level and water quality monitoring in the Seven Rivers area, and calculations of aquifer drawdown attributable to ISC's pumping of our well fields. I should also note that this work plan includes a special request from the Commission for a sole source contract with John Nelson, our contractor there in Lake Arthur. That contract is expiring this year, and so there's a request included in this work plan for a new contract. And I should say, Mr. Nelson has provided excellent services in terms of O&M at the Lake Arthur well field. In addition, this work plan includes our assessments to Carlsbad Irrigation District and Hagerman Irrigation Company. Those are annual assessments associated with the water rights owned by the state. It also includes funding for surveys and appraisals and easements associated in particular with the 2 parcels that the state still owns as a result of the purchases for the 2003 PAYGO settlement agreement. We are in the process of working on selling those 2 parcels, and then we will no longer be in the land management business, which is a good thing. In addition, this work plan includes support for protested applications. That includes both the protest of New Mexico's transfers of water rights into the well field, the 33 applications that were protested, and our protests of other water rights transfers in the basin. And lastly, this work plan includes support for the discussions that Director Longworth mentioned earlier of the 2003 PAYGO settlement parties. So we have been meeting with them again and looking at possible additional opportunities for agreements in the basin, creative solutions to prolonged drought that we may be facing. And this work plan includes funding to support those discussions. In terms of changes from last year's work plan, this work plan does assume that we would need to pump the well fields per the settlement this fiscal year. It also supports, as I said, the PAYGO settlement parties discussions. There is increased budget associated with protests in the basin. And I'd like to say that I am very hopeful and optimistic that we can do some work collaboratively with the Office of the State Engineer on model improvements for both the Roswell Artesian Basin model and the Carlsbad model. The folks at the district office are boots on the ground. They're where the rubber hits the road. And so if there's a way that ISC can support their efforts, and I think one of the good ways we could do that is through partnering with them and improving the models that are used to assess transfers in the basin. I think that's a very good use of our resources. Particularly right now with oil and gas development in the southeast part of the state, they are really getting pummeled with applications, and I'd like to be able to support them through necessary model improvements. Okay, so again, the budget for this work plan is $2,352,387. Of that, $1,819,400 is coming from the Irrigation Works Construction Fund, and $532,987 is a PAYGO settlement appropriation from the legislature that we are hoping to use to purchase additional water rights in the basin. That appropriation was reauthorized this past legislative session, and we have 2 years to spend it, so it will expire June 30th, 2020. With that, I will take questions.
Thank you.
Have any questions?
Sure. Yes. Could you say that last thing again? I was busy writing something down about the purchase of water rights.
Sure. So in 2014, the legislature appropriated money for the Pecos Bureau, $1 million, to support the implementation of the Pecos settlement. The remaining balance on that is $532,987, and that appropriation was reauthorized this past legislative session. It will expire on June 30th, 2020. And our focus for those funds is additional water rights purchases in the basin in support of the Pecos settlement agreement.
Thank you. Any commission thoughts?
Would you go over again the assessment fees?
Yes.
What are they for?
Okay, so the water rights that were purchased by the state as required by the 2003 settlement agreement included water rights in the Carlsbad Irrigation District and water rights in the Roswell Artesian Basin. The water rights in the Carlsbad Irrigation District have annual assessments, just like other CID members pay an annual assessment. And so our current assessment with CID is $387,000 a year. So this work plan includes that payment to CID for our assessment. And then in the Roswell Artesian Basin, we purchased water rights from the Hagerman Irrigation Company. And likewise, that company has annual assessments associated with its water rights, and our current assessment from Hagerman is $98,000 a year.
Any questions, Commissioner Sanchez?
Just following up on water rights purchases, if that amount still remains available. We have 2020 to spend it. If it's not spent, will we reauthorize, or is that it sunsets at that point?
I believe we can ask for reauthorization. That doesn't mean we would get it.
So is there, I guess, an amount of water rights that we would still like to purchase, or we're just kind of, it's just floating out there, if something comes up, we can purchase it? I guess point being is that is there a targeted amount that you would like to obtain, that way we kind of, we have that insurance, I guess, of having the supply.
Chairman Sanchez, Commissioner Sanchez, the 2003 Pecos settlement agreement set minimum thresholds for each basin. Those were 4,500 acres in the Carlsbad Basin and 7,500 acres in the Roswell Basin. The state didn't quite meet those minimum thresholds, but just very close to them, and the parties agreed that it was sufficient to go to full implementation. But the agreement itself said that we would purchase a minimum of 4,500 in the Carlsbad Basin, but up to 6,000 in the Carlsbad Basin, and a minimum of 7,500 in the Roswell Basin, up to 11,000. And we have not continued to make purchases towards those ultimate targets. And that's where we'd like to apply these funds, understanding that $500,000 doesn't really buy a lot of water rights, but every little bit counts.
Thank you for that recap. I forgot about those.
Any additional questions? Secretary Wayne?
You talked about updating models and coordinated work with would it be our hydrology section? What needs to be done to make sure that happens?
Chairman Sanchez, Secretary Blaine, we have already had some preliminary conversations with folks at Hydrology Bureau, and they're very excited about doing that collaboratively, and ISC bringing some resources to bear. What I would like to do is put together a little technical working group with some real expertise. Eric Keys at Hydrology Bureau at the Office of the State Engineer has been there a long time, knows those models very well, and would be the perfect resource to guide those improvements. And we have to prioritize. In our preliminary meeting with him, we identified a whole list of things that could be done to improve both the Carlsbad model and the Roswell Basin model. And so I think we'd have to prioritize that work. Ideally, I'd like to have participants from the district office as well on that working group to guide those efforts, and then sort of knock out those tasks one by one. That would be, I think it's in all of our interests to have excellent models. And so the more we can focus on that, I think the better off we'll all be.
Mr. Chairman, Hannah, if you'll put together a task list of things that need to happen to accomplish this and a tentative schedule, and present it to me as state engineer, I'll make sure we have staff available to participate at whatever level we need to. So I feel this is a highly critical element that needs to be accomplished quickly. I think given the activities of the oil and gas industry down there, I don't want it to come in after the horse has left the barn. And so whatever resources we need to develop to make sure these things happen, I'll make sure that we can accommodate that.
Chairman Sanders, Secretary Blank, thank you very much. I'd be happy to do that on one condition. I'd like to put together that list, but I would like to get input from Andy Morley, the district manager, before that priorities list is finalized. He knows better than anyone else what's needed in the basin, and so it's critical that he participate in sort of saying this is where we need improvements the most. And so if that could go through him, and if he, can participate in whatever way he's able to in that technical group, that would be fantastic.
I'll work with Andy through Director Romero and make sure that he's available to help establish that priority list.
Okay.
I do want to revisit I had a distraction that was urgent, but we were talking about the water rights. How many acres of rights have been purchased in CID out of the 6,000?
Just shy of 4,500.
Okay. And then was the other out of the Roswell Artesian Basin?
Correct, and that's just shy of the 7,500.
And how far, do you have a preference in where the rights would be purchased? With the $500,000 balance that's in that?
Chairman Sanders, Secretary Blank, we have a list of offers that we've received in the last 2 years. It's short, there's about 6 different offers we've received from throughout the basin. So far, we've been prioritizing looking at shallow groundwater or surface rights in the Roswell Basin. But I think that ideally we'd like to engage our PACO settlement parties in prioritizing where those funds would be expended for additional water rights in the basin.
Does it make any difference where the rights are retired on the flows of the PACOs?
Chairman Sanchez, Secretary Blaine, yes, and I think that what we're looking at is where do we get the biggest bang for our buck? And at this point, the reason that I say we've been looking at shallow groundwater close to the river or surface rights in the Roswell area is that gets more water to the river and increases supply for CID. So that's why that's been the focus, rather than purchasing additional artesian water rights for transfer to the well fields.
This funding was authorized in 2014. It's been 4 years, and only half has been expended. Can you tell me why it's slowly? Is there a reason that there's a delay in moving forward on this?
Chairman Sanchez, Secretary Blaine, you would think here we need a lot more than $1 million on the PACOs, and so we get this little bit of money and then we move slowly with it, which doesn't help asking for additional funds. I think in part, that was, the request was for 10 million, and then we received 1, and it felt like you couldn't really get a lot of rights for that. But as I said earlier, every little bit counts, and so I think in part that funding has been expended on improvements of the well field, including the variable frequency drives, and the SCADA equipment, which will support better operations, optimal operations once we fire things back on. But we certainly are committed to additional purchases and want to make sure that that happens before the 2020 deadline.
I don't want to wait till 2020.
No.
I would add that we have been a little understaffed, so it's just hard to throw man hours or people out of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any additional questions? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
So,
Motion is second. Any further discussion? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Do we need a separate motion on the water well agreement? Or is that authorized in the work plan?
I believe that's authorized in the work. That
Okay.
work plan includes a request for authorization to
Thank
enter
you.
into the contract with John Nelson.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Moving on to a brief presentation on trust funds. Let's see, Elaine,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've asked Jeff Prim to take the lead on this presentation.
Chairman, members of the commission, my name is Jeff Prim. I'm the program support director for the Office of State Engineer and State Street Commission. Good morning. State Engineer Blaine has asked me to give a brief overview of the status of the trust fund. You should have in front of you a revised projection from what was in your packet. And I'll just go over it briefly in terms of the layout and a couple of the highlighted elements that would be of interest to you, and then see if you have any further questions after. So what you have in front of you is a projection that we've used since I arrived at the agency. You'll see the two trust funds are up at the top of the sheet, Irrigation Works Construction Fund, Improvement of the Rio Grande Fund. You also see a fund that you don't normally pay much attention to. The reason for that is because it doesn't relate to ISC operations directly. It's the Water Project Fund that funds adjudications in the Mitigation and Adjudication Program in the Office of the State Engineer. The reason why I have that third item in here, even though the primary purpose is to talk about trust funds, is because that fund gets funded through severance tax bond capacity, which fluctuates. And as you know, the oil and gas income has been down for several years, which created a situation where that revenue source to the agency became a bit of an albatross for us. And it created deficits budgetarily. And the way that those deficits have been covered for the last couple of years is to rely on the trust funds to backfill them. That was what was appropriated for us as backfills through the legislative appropriation process. So, that said, what I'd point out is I've highlighted a few cells in yellow, and I've also, within the two trust fund projections, included a row with red text. You'll see that those rows are titled Specials and Bar Authority. That's where you'll see in each of the fiscal year columns where the trust funds are being tapped to send money either down into the Water Project Fund or for Bar Authority or for specials, including Texas v. New Mexico litigation. So you'll see that sizable amounts of money have been earmarked out of the trust funds for special topics, in addition to the fact that those trust funds have been utilized through the appropriation process, through legislative authority to fund operations that are outside of the the normal statutory uses of those trust funds. Now, that said, the good news is that a couple of years ago, when I started with the agency, there was a risk that our trust funds, and in particular the Irrigation Works Construction Fund, was perhaps, or was at risk of being fully depleted by not exactly this time, but a few months from now in our projections. The good news is that that status is no longer the reality that we're living in. So luckily, the trust funds have had positive surprises in terms of increased revenues back to the stronger levels that we had seen in prior years. So that was good news for our fund balances. The other thing that we had were positive surprises on the expenditure sides. The way our agency's budget is constructed, both for OSC and ISC, is that we're appropriated a certain amount, but we don't always spend that. In particular, in ISC's budget, there are some PEGOS and Rio Grande delivery activities that are included in our recurring operating budget. But as you know, the last couple of years, we haven't had to do a lot of dredging and augmentation well field pumping, which has saved us a tremendous amount of money. So whereas we were having to build into our expenditure projections, fully expending the appropriations that were allotted to us by the legislature, we didn't need to spend all the money that we were projecting. So between not spending as much as we were appropriated and having increased revenues, I'm happy to say that right now projecting fiscal year 18 year-end fund balance in the Irrigation Works Construction Fund of approximately $14.9 million. That's much bigger than zero. And fiscal year 18 and the improvement to the Rio Grande Fund, which was stronger in our projections 2 years ago, is actually doing quite well at $8.7 million relative to where we thought it would be. As you can see, the improvement to the Rio Grande Income Fund has had $1.2 million in hits for Texas v. New Mexico types of interstate litigation, and it also has potential for up to $2 bar authority to fill budget shortfalls in the water project fund for LAP. Right now, I'm projecting it would only end up needing to be tapped for potentially around $200,000. But even with that increased reliance that this trust fund in particular hasn't experienced in the past, both through that increased reliance for our agency's operating budget and for these special items, the improvement to the Rio Grande Fund appears to also be turning a corner in terms of fund balances. So that's the big picture summary of the trust fund status. If you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them, but otherwise.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes, Commissioner Clark.
Mr. Chairman, as it relates to the availability of these funds, are these funds available to, or are they split between OSC and ISC, or allocated in some way? But how is that? What happens there?
Chairman, Commissioner Thorpe, that's a good question. Let me see if I can give you a good answer to that. So there are kind of two answers. I would say statutorily, in terms of how the funds were envisioned to be used, it was envisioned that the trust funds, which are the top two here on the page, and I'll just focus on those two because the water project fund is for the litigation and adjudication program exclusively. So between the two trust funds, I would say that the answer is twofold. Originally, those two trust funds were set up through laws, not just statute, through the Constitution, to serve purposes that were, I would say, probably expected to be almost exclusively ISC types of operational needs and expenditures. over time, through the budget shortfalls, over the last almost decade now, decisions were made by those who have to take into account a lot of different statewide needs. Decisions were made to increase the reliance, or actually create a reliance on the trust funds for overall agency operations. And that being primarily a shift to funding OSC operations that it didn't used to fund, in addition to the ISC operations that it historically has funded. So,
Mr. Chairman, kind of a point of clarification on that. That decision wasn't an internal or executive decision. That was a legislative decision. That was direction for use of these funds to make up shortfalls because there was a reduction in the general fund appropriated to the agency. And when I say the agency, it's OSC, ISC. I'm sorry, go ahead.
John, Commissioner Thorpe, that's exactly correct. It was to supplant general funds so it could be diverted elsewhere in the state, or to not to decrease the state's reliance on general fund. And that happened back in the mid-2000s, I believe, was when that started. And the reliance has grown over time from the original amounts. Once the legislature got their paws in the honeypot, they realized it was a solid fund that they could rely on for some time. I would say in their defense, one of the very positive things that happened that I didn't mention out of this last legislative session was that the legislative appropriation process actually started to unwind some of that reliance on the trust funds indirectly by increasing the general fund appropriation to the litigation and adjudication program. So within the reliance between all these funds, by helping to fund labs operations, it's actually helping the trust funds because it decreases the amount that we have to draw out of there to supplant general fund, or to make up for a lack of general fund or water project fund appropriation. I know this is a lot of jargon. Did that make sense?
So is this something that is reviewed and decided on at each legislative session?
That's correct.
Okay.
Any other questions? If not, thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on, Hannah, we have a request to approve an MOU as PVACD and delegate authority to the director.
Thank you, Chairman Sanchez. I'd like to begin by acknowledging Mr. Aaron Bollock, PVACD manager, who made the trip up here to join us. This item is a request for the commission to approve an addendum to a memorandum of agreement between the ISC and PVACD for the loan of water rights, and a request for delegation to the director to sign this addendum. There was some discussion earlier about the requirements associated with the 2003 Pecos settlement agreement for the state to purchase water rights. And as I mentioned earlier, we just almost but not quite met those minimum thresholds. Another of the requirements in the 2003 settlement agreement was to have a certain pumping capacity at the augmentation well fields. And in order to meet specifically that requirement, we had not purchased sufficient water rights to meet that requirement. And so we entered into a memorandum of agreement with PVACD for the loan of water rights associated with just over 800 acres in the Roswell Basin for transfer into the well field in order to meet that minimum requirement. So that original memorandum of agreement was entered into in 2008 and has been extended twice since then. This will be the third extension. And the addendum before you today is an extension for 1 additional year. I'd like to say, and this goes back to Secretary Blaine's questions earlier, the intent of the 2003 PACO settlement agreement was that the state would continue purchasing water rights. And so when we entered into this MOA with PVACD, the assumption was that it would be for a limited period of time, at which point we could hand back their water rights. Unfortunately, the state has not had sufficient additional funds, despite the $500,000 that we hope to spend in the next year, in order to release these water rights. And PVACD has been a kind partner and a committed partner in the 2003 settlement agreement and has agreed to extend this agreement, as I've said multiple times. Ideally, we would at some point have sufficient funds appropriated to purchase enough water rights that we would not need the PVACD water rights. The additional $500,000 we have available to us now will not be sufficient to mean that we will not need the loan of their water rights, which means it's likely we may have to extend this agreement again in the future. But for now, we are pleased that they are willing to extend this loan. And I have actually, thanks to Aaron and their board, a version of the addendum which has already been signed by them. The current agreement expires on July 1st. So we're right down to the wire here. And so really all I'm here to do today is to request your approval of the addendum, the 1-year addendum, and as I said, delegation to the director to sign. And I take any questions.
Any questions for him?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
How many acres are there? How many acre feet are there?
Acre feet? It's water rights associated with just over 800 acres. There was a table in your packet. Let me tell you that now. So it's acre feet, 3,136.3 acre feet. It's the amount of the loan from PVACD.
Okay.
And also just I'd like to add, they have, despite us not continuing to purchase rights, they have continued to purchase water rights in both Carlsbad and the Roswell Basin, which is appreciated.
Thank you. Any other questions? All in favor of the motion? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming, Aaron. Appreciate it. Moving on, amending Interstate Stream Commission contracts. Marcos, you'll be brief.
ISC staff is requesting commission approval to amend the following ISC contracts for use in fiscal year 2019. Contract 19051 with Boulder and Associates increased from $730,000 to $760,000. Contract 19052 with Daniel B. Stevens and Associates increasing from $959,000 to $1,050,000. Contract 19057 with SS Papadopoulos and Associates increased from $1.245 million to $1.450 million. Contract 19063 with SWCA Environmental Consultants increasing from $1.491 million to $2 million. Contract 19055 with West Consultants Inc. increasing from $365,000 to $500,000. And contract number 19060 with Geosystems Analysis increasing from $275,000 to $585,000. And the ISC staff has closed out FY 2018 and has determined that increases to these contracts are needed in order for these contractors to continue providing additional services for FY 2019 work plans. Staff is requesting commission authorization to enter into, execute, and submit to DFA for final approval amendments to these contracts.
And these are in line with existing appropriations and budgets?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions of Marcos? Yes, Commissioner Clark?
What's the basis for the adjustments?
Basically, what we've done is, when we close out our fiscal year 2018, there's no existing cost ceiling available in order to meet the needs for the FY 2019 work plans. So if our staff wants to issue work to any of these contractors, we will be unable to do it unless there's a cost ceiling increase to their contracts in order to do that. So the budget that you set up with, the budget that's been approved in each of the work plans so far, if one of those
Requires
programs,
contract modifications.
yeah, they'll require modifications in order for those contractors to be used on any of those work plans. There's no funding on their contract available.
Any other questions? If not, is there a motion to approve the amendments to these contracts? So moved. Second? Second. Motion is second. Any further discussion? Not, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Marcus. Where you now headed to closed session, need a roll call vote, please? We need a motion first.
I, Commissioner Hollifield, move that the commission go into closed session discussion pursuant to NMSA 1978, Chapter 10, Article 15, Section 1, Subsection 87, regarding Texas v. New Mexico and Colorado, number 141 original, and Texas v. New Mexico, number 65 original, and Paul Brandy, Ron Griggs, Zachary Cook, Jimmy Hall, Larry Larenga. There you go. Rod Montoya, Stephen Neville, William Scherer, James Strickler, Pat Woods, v. NMSIC, Tom Blaine, and NMOSE, and pending administrative litigation relating to protests of water rights applications in the lower Pecos Basin.
Is there a second?
That's both and
There's a motion and a second to go to closed session. Roll call, please.
Chairman Sanchez,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Ford,
Yes.
Secretary Blaine,
Yes.
Commissioner Gordon Sanchez,
Oh, yes. All right.
Commissioner Holyfield,
Yes.
Commissioner Gonzalez, Commissioner King. Commissioner McCaskill.
The motion carries. We're going to adjourn to second floor, I believe.
Mr. Chairman, before we leave, I do want to make a note for the record that I will be participating in items A, B, and C, but will not be participating. We're in the room in item number D, which is pending administrative litigation related to protests of water rights applications in the lower Pecos